Preservation Association Lincoln Brown Bag Lecture Series. My name's Eileen Burke, and I'm the coordinator of these brown bags. The videotaping today is sponsored by the Historic Preservation Fund of the U.S. Department of Interior through the Nebraska State Historical Society and the City of Lincoln, a certified local government. Our speaker today is Robert C. Ripley. Bob is a registered professional architect and fellow of the American Institute of Architects. Bob recently retired from the Office of Capitol Commission at the Nebraska State Capitol Building. He is a native of Lincoln, Nebraska, and he is also a graduate of the University of Nebraska, Lincoln College of Architecture with a bachelor's in architecture degree. Bob's talk today is 40 years of the Nebraska State Capitol. Please join me in welcoming Bob.
Thanks as usual, Eileen, for that very nice introduction. I also want to thank a few people without which I don't do presentations from the springboard of the Capitol, and that's primarily Roxanne Smith. And Roxanne is kind of my right and left hand when it comes to putting these kinds of slides and visual presentations together. And so thank you, Roxanne. I also want to say, now that I'm retired, and in a public forum, thank you to all the staff who've served with me in my 40 years at the Capitol as part of the Office of the Capitol Commission or its predecessor agency. We have an enormous amount of talent, which you will see in some of these slides at the Capitol. And I have loved working at the Capitol, but even more I've loved the people I've worked with because they represent the kind of skill and talent, enthusiasm and dedication that it takes to do the quality of work that they produce. And I also want to extend a kind of a broad thank you to those people who are officed in the Capitol and have had to tolerate all the hubbub going on in that building for the last 40 years. A friend said to me a few years ago, "Gee, Bob, it's so too bad. During your tenure at the Capitol, man, you just really drew the short straw. You had all this work to do. Man, you had this project and that project, that masonry work." And I said, yeah, that's true. But I said, I'm the lucky one. If you're an architect, that's exactly what you want to be doing. You want to be busy and you want to do the biggest projects. You want to do the most holistic work you can, especially on a building like the Capitol. And so I've been the one who's really had the best possible option for doing work, and it's been fantastic. And I want to thank all the people out there who are seeing this, not live, but as well, especially my friends who filled this room today. You're the owners of the building. You have that undivided interest of ownership in the Capitol. As the Capitol, as value goes up and the number of people in the state goes up, the money is insignificant. There's a great statement above the main entrance to the Capitol, my favorite on the entire building, and it is, "The salvation of the state is watchfulness in the citizen." And you could substitute one word in there for the thanks I have for the citizens during my 40 years, and you could say, the salvation of this Capitol is watchfulness in the citizen, because people have paid attention and they have supported what we've been doing. It's been phenomenal, the level of support that our office has received during my 40 years there. There were a few complaints when it first started because it was something new. We were promoting the Capitol, that sort of thing. The truth is, people, if anything, call in and want to know more. It's usually not a complaint. And if it is, maybe they've been given not exactly the 100% accurate information. So I'm always happy to talk to people who have, if they didn't have an interest, they wouldn't call in. They wouldn't say or they wouldn't complain. And those are the ones that I most like to talk to because they have the vested interest enough to care and not just read it in the paper, tear up the paper and throw it away. They call in and say, what's going on here? And I'm happy to oblige their question. Now, I'm going to get rolling because I've about 40 years is real hard to compress into 35 slides. And I compress it down into about 8 projects, some of which have multiple slides and some only 1 or 2. But it's kind of, there's some large and there's some small projects. And I'm going to work real hard at giving you enough time to answer a couple of questions if you have them at the end. Now, I brought along a little show and tell because I can. This right here, you'll see photographed, and this was an object that our office had made for the 100th anniversary of the creation of the Nebraska Capital Commission in 1919. In 2019, one of these was given to all 8 voting members of the Capital Commission to commemorate that event. And I had one made with my name on it because we were going to need one to put in the archive. And so I've had it sitting in my office gathering dust, and now it can be dusted off and put into the archive in relatively short order. Now, rather than talk at you, it's really great to see a full house. I was lamenting to my wife earlier today. I said, you know, I really liked it when the room was full with people. And I said, it's a little less so now, and I think people maybe watch it online. And today, I was proved very wrong. I wish the camera was swung around because I can't tell you how much I appreciate all the friends and acquaintances and colleagues sitting in the audience today. Okay, here's kind of where my primary work started out. This is actually a photograph in the Capitol. You look at the floor, you see the raised flooring there, and by the way, I want to acknowledge the photographer of these black and white photos. He's with us today, Jim Handland, former retired from BVH Architecture, and he's the fellow who took every one of these black and whites you're going to see. There's about 5 or 6 of them. I show you this because that's a computer room. You see the mainframes beyond the door. You see Harlan Johnson, my dear friend, no longer with us, just behind that door, and that raised computer flooring. You could go into the courtyards of the Capitol and expect to see a window that looked into these rooms, but you couldn't see in because they were all walled off on the interior of the building. You hadn't been able to see out of this computer room into the courtyard for years before this photograph was taken. Ah, good. And this was our poster child photograph, and it's a little washed out here, but you'll notice there's a very clever system of walls here. Stud paneling with dime store paneling with wood studs. You notice how they created a window so the light fixture could go through without having to pay an electrician to come in and do some alteration. We were cutting corners in those days, and what you can't see, I can see a little bit in the image on the right. You can see the 1x1 acoustic tiles that were all over the ceiling of many offices. We took some between 85 and 90,000 square feet of these tiles out of the building and the glue dots that went with them during the '89 interior renovation project. And so what you see here are those tiles coming down, a hole in them, and a light fixture running through it. We no longer use that kind of clever shortcut on the renovation in the building. The details of what we do today were nothing we had to create. All we had to do was look around the building to see the kind of construction details that were built initially, and we simply reproduced them with regard to any work we did once we took interim walls like this down. These walls were put up with every good faith interest in trying to do something good to keep government functioning. They just didn't do much for the soul, they didn't do much for architecture, and frankly, they were a hazard in there. They were a fire hazard and a variety of other things. Here you see another really nice one. There's Harlan and yours truly with his back to the camera. You'll notice the paneling goes all the way up to, in this case, the 12-foot ceiling. Light fixtures stopped. The worst light fixtures you can buy are those wraparound lens units like you see in the black and white photograph. They put down only light to the desktop. They hot glare, and they do not illuminate the room well. The inset on the right, thanks to my colleague Roxanne once again, took photographs of what these rooms look like now, with the ceilings gone, the acoustic tiles missing, and light fixtures that reflect to the ceiling as well as to the user below them. Take a look at this photograph and look at the floor at the bottom of those panels. That's what passed for ventilation, good ventilation, in the 1980s and before. These are, again, what I call the dime store paneling. They couldn't have spent more than $1 or $2 for each panel that is nailed to that wood stud wall. Not exactly quality of construction for a commercial property. And you see the bottom is open because they needed some ventilation. They would get hot and sticky and uncomfortable during various times of the year. So that was the solution, real creative kind of dime store solutions to architectural problems. You'll notice in the upper left, that's what the room in color looks like today. And this one is really a sweetheart. Take a look at that black and white photo on the left. That is a second floor office, the only one in it. You notice that the light fixture is kind of running down the center of the room with that kind of high water pants drapery hanging on the windows. Some of it goes all the way down, but the truth is the drape didn't run from the top of the window all the way to the sill. They did it in 2 layers, and they cut off the top half of the window with 1 layer of drape, and then they stuck the traverse rod just under that first layer of drape so they could get it all the way down to the window sill. We no longer do that in the building either. As you can see on the right-hand side, ceilings are all the way to the top, appropriate light fixtures, color scheme, and so on and so forth. So now I'm jumping to a new project. The second most expensive project that I was involved in. The earlier work that you saw was about a $4 million interior renovation of the Capitol in the early 1980s. Take that back. Late 80s, early 90s. Remember, it's been 40 years. This is a photograph of a project that took 12 years. The reason it took so long was because the economy was iffy a few of those years. We originally expected this project on the exterior of the building to take 8 years. It took 12 because the economy slowed down. Credit state government for having the courage to say, we're not going to stop this project, we're just going to cut its funding back. That was an enormous advantage to us because there is a terrific learning curve, as those in the architectural profession can attest. There's a terrific learning curve when you're working with a contractor doing work on an historic landmark like our Capitol. It takes 6 months to a year before, on a long multi-year project, to really get the people in the field up to speed with knowing what they should and shouldn't do. We always say to contractors, when you have a question in the field, especially in the first 6 months or a year you're on the job, if you you don't know what to do, don't guess. Ask. We do not want you making a jump into the abyss and causing irreparable damage to the finishes. And by and large, we've had the great good fortune of contractors who've done that. They've taken the time. And yes, it's slow in the early going, but after they've asked a series of questions, most of those take care of themselves after that. So it has been a great thing. We worked with a company out of Chicago by the name of Mark I Restoration in this work. This is the east side of the Capitol. That platform you see in front is a staircase down, and there's an elevator in there as well, and that's how we got material up from the lawn, across the roof of the Capitol to the base of the tower, and there was a man lift on one corner, and the opposite corner had a material lift, and so everything was shuttled up and down within that framework of scaffold that you see on the face of the tower. It was a tremendous logistical issue, and it was by the time we were done, we'd kind of gone through various sorts of expectations on cost estimate. We started out in the $25 to $30 million. Then we revamped what we were doing. We're thinking, we really need to go about this in a very, very holistic fashion. We started out thinking that we could do this and do it a little bit here, a little bit there. The truth is this, ladies and gentlemen, if you ever have a project where you need to put scaffold around the building, do everything you possibly can that scaffold will give you access to, because the scaffold on the face of the tower that you see there comprised 40% of the total cost of working on the tower. 40% of the cost to do the work on the tower was just getting there. So believe me, once we realized those costs, we kind of took a step back and say, what else can we do while we're there? Because we certainly don't want to turn around in 5 years, invest that kind of money to come back and do a smaller percentage of work than we would have done originally. So this was done. It was very well coordinated. Mark I Restoration of Chicago we've, I can't tell you what great good fortune we had with contractors over my 40 years. Mark I was spectacular, and they would do things in the field before we could get to them and say, you know, you really ought to do this. They would have it in place. And I was very impressed with their dedication to the job and their honesty in their pricing. They were a dream to work with, just like we're having great success with Sampson Construction, a local contractor, and like we had before, our experience with the interior renovation with Kingery Construction. We had great people, they were very dedicated, and they took on the work at the Capitol as if it were their Capitol too. And it's enormously reassuring to work with people who think on their own and help you do your job better. Okay, here we are, east side, getting ready to go. Take a look at that kind of platform you see at the top of the tower where the four corner turrets are. That's what it looks like from those platforms. And you'll notice these guys who work in these lofty heights, they're a little more casual about where they place their feet than I am, because you'll notice there's two planks there with a big gap between them. I go up to places like that, and believe you me, all I'm doing is looking down until I can hold on to the scaffold and turn around and look at the building. They walk around up there like they're on a sidewalk at street level. And they were very, very skilled individuals. This is at the 14th floor level. If you look to the left edge of this slide, you'll see kind of a wall, looks like a handrail wall between the two turrets, right up against the left edge of this image. That's the very top of the wall at 14th floor. So when you walk out on 14, you're looking through openings that wall tops, okay? So they're way up there. We're looking north here. You look down to the lower right, and you can see the former Woodman building, now used as state offices. The tower was an interesting project because there was something done in the tower that was, we really had to stop and kind of come up with a solution for. It was a conflict between the way the building was designed to be built and the manner in which it was ultimately built. And I'll try to use this explanation. The tower is like, structurally, is like a four-legged table that rises 375 feet in the air, 400 feet to the top of the soar, but four legs. Consider those maybe the elevator shafts in the four corners, with a whole series of tops attached to those legs. Those tops are the floor structure at each floor in the tower. And let's take 7th floor. 8th floor, 9th floor, all of them are attached to these four legs that go all the way to the foundation. Now, let's say 7th floor, that tabletop has an edge with a shelf angle around it, and all of the stone that encloses 7th floor sits on the edge of that tabletop all the way around. And there is a break all the way through the wall before you get up to the next tabletop, which is 8th floor, and it has a ledge all the way around it. And then you put the stone that encloses 8th floor all the way around the edge of that, and so on as you go up the tower. The problem was the building was designed to be built that way, but ultimately the stone on the exterior face has to have a break all the way through the wall at each floor level in order to keep 8th floor stone from sitting on 7th floor stone and 6th floor stone and so on. That is what you don't want, because it's a compound load that gets greater and greater as you go down the tower. And that's why we had an enormous amount of cracking on the exterior of the building. It was never intended to be built that way. It just happened to slip by the architect and the structural engineer. And so we started the project and we said, boy, we have to cause that break to go all the way through the wall. The tabletop at 7th floor holds only the stone that encloses 7th floor. But it was sitting under all of the floors above it. So we had to go in, create an opening or a cut through the wall to separate 8th floor from 9th floor from 10th floor. That is what's going on here. This is actually, you see that black beam to the background? That is actually the edge of the floor structure. There is an angle iron at the bottom where there's a little bit of rust, and that's where the stone was sitting, but it did not, this original framing system, there was not a break all the way through the wall. We established that break. In a couple of cases, we couldn't put original stone back because the stone had to be damaged, so there was some new stone put in place. That was all done very carefully, as much of a match as we could. If you look at the building, eventually the slight difference in color you might see one floor to the next will disappear. Now, this is a turret, like a bird might see it, one of the four corners. Underneath this is the elevator vestibule, the 14th floor. Every piece of stone in this faceted top had to be cut, removed, and a lead pan put underneath all of those stones once to create an entire continuous lead membrane to keep moisture that will eventually get into the stone joints and go down. Instead of getting it inside the building, it hits the lead pan, runs to the edge, and off it goes. So it's a roof within the stone wall. You're seeing it before the lead that was ultimately put on top of the joints in that faceted top were put in place. Now, during that time, we also did, through Save Outdoor Sculpture, a project and a program developed by Target stores nationally. We applied for a grant, were successful. Maida Jensen of Omaha was the lady who did all of the work in conserving this with her team. The sower's image on the left is what it looked like before the restoration began. And after we were able to get all the bronze disease off, bronze is capable of weathering a great deal of abuse and erosion. The corrosion that forms on bronze, you want to be just green. When it has other colors and it starts to erode the actual bronze material, that you don't want. We were able to stop the bronze disease that was starting to occur due to pollution in the air, clean it all off, and then the sower on the right is the way he looked ultimately. Bear in mind, the top of the sower's head is 400 feet above the ground. Standing between the feet of the sower, his kneecap comes to about right here on me. Now, there you are. Imagine yourself standing between the feet of the sower, the aviation beacon being in place, and as you're standing there, you're looking around and all you can see is the kneecap of the sower. For a guy 6'4", my eyes are 6 feet above the ground, that's about what it's like. And I can't tell you how difficult it was to take this photograph. The photographer had to run, jump out, turn around, snap the photograph before he hit the dome. Actually, there was a scaffold here. We just did a careful job of cropping it out of the picture so it looks like a bird took the photograph than others. We also, during the masonry project, installed a new copper roof. What you see here in the foreground that looks like kind of a brick wall laying on its side is called flat lock copper work, and it is a good system where you must have a flat surface for the copper. It was not very well attached. You'll see there's a rib that comes up about every 30 feet in this flat lock. That is nowhere near enough anchorage to the surface of the deck, and the roof, copper roof, when it got hot, would bow up, sometimes 12 inches above the deck. You didn't walk around there when it was hot because you were putting your foot down on a piece of copper that you were kind of walking a wrinkle out of the roof. It was not a good condition, and so we came up with a better detailing. The copper was fine. The manner in which it was built was not. And here's what we ultimately came up with. 80% of the copper roof now looks like this. You see where that blue tape is located. Those are battens. So the copper pans are held to the roof deck every 16 inches on center instead of every 30 feet. You don't have these big bubbles of copper that expand between the battens. They're all very well anchored. Only about 20% of the copper roof today is flat lock, and that's only where you get to the bottom of the battens and the water has to slope to the side to get to the drains. Rather than dam it up with battens, you have to have flat lock. This is a far more skillfully installed system. The original roof was 16-ounce copper, which means 16 ounces per square foot, 1 pound of copper per square foot. We put back 20-ounce copper, thicker, can withstand more abuse from items being dropped, or over time anything that might impact the roof. You'll notice also in this image where that red waste bucket sits. It's sitting on a rubber membrane roof under the copper membrane. So there's actually two roofs on the building. One at deck level on top of the insulation that we added. Bear in mind, 2.5 acres of copper roof are what we have. That was an $11 million roof when we put it in place. And you might say, whew, like our budget office said, oh man, you'll never ever get anybody to fund that. Once the figures were put together, we said, well, we're not so sure. We put this copper roof on and we'll get 80 to 100 years of life out of it. And if you put on a conventional roof, like a build-up roof, maybe tar and gravel, maybe rubber membrane, you'll replace those every 30 years. You'll put on 3 of those roofs in the time one roof of copper will last. And of course, it doesn't stay the same price 30 years from now that it does today. So that made the difference. Life cycle costing made the day and said, copper roofs are clearly the best long-term solution. Everything we do, we run life cycle costing through on it, because with most buildings like our homes, yeah, they might last 50 or 60 years, maybe 80 years. A building like this is just getting started after 80 years. So we think in terms of centuries, not decades of time, and we do all of our cost estimating projected out. And that is indeed what makes the unfaithful faithful to us with regard to committing to spending the money well the first time and saving money over the long run. The dome, also a roof. You'll see where that really dark middle of the screen image is. That was meant to be an expansion joint, and at one time it was before the caulking fell out of the joint. Moisture gets in, gets behind the tile, it'll freeze thaw, it'll start popping tile off. We were in danger of losing tile by the time we got to stabilizing it just before COVID. We thought we were going to stabilize it, as you see here. Notice there's that black tape about midway along. It covers that horizontal joint to keep moisture out. It's an adhesive rubber tape. The netting you see over the top of it was put on where the tile was very loose, and so that we didn't lose tile over that 1-year stabilization. How many was that?
30.
Thank you. Good. I'll look at my, yeah, I think I'm pretty good so far. Now, as you know, the mouth and the slides don't run at the same speed many times, at least not with me. And so what you see here is netting that was put in place as an extra insurance in case those tiles did pop loose. You can imagine we don't go to a local supplier and just pick up some of this gold tile in a box. This has also been weathered for about 100 years, and so its color varies over the dome. So you don't want to have to replace it with new tile, which would look like somebody who went to the dentist and had a brand new gold tooth installed in the middle of their smile. We try to do all we can to preserve original materials, because that is the core of what preservation is about. Once that was done, some of the tiles had to be taken up. As you'll note, there's blue tape on a lot of those tiles. Every one of those tiles was numbered. Wherever they were put back in the same order, same location where they were taken off. There had actually been a bubble previously in the tile, and we had to take the tile up. We had to take the setting bed beneath it up so that we could get everything right back down to where all of the tile had originally been set. It was a lot of work, and my dear friend and colleague, Matt Hansen, architect in the office, with a rubber mallet sounded out every tile to make sure he knew where all of them were, and had the ones taken up. There were more tiles taken up than we thought. There are some, I was going to ask Matt this, I think on the order of 22,000 tiles on the dome, and I think we ended up taking up around 2,500 of them. because they were loose or needed to be reset because their setting bed had popped loose. So this is in the course of the work. You can see along the edge of the tile on the left a little bit where it needs to be back down to the surface of its substrate. Then this is more the finished product. You see where the gentlemen are sitting, the joints are darker, they're wet, they have not yet cured. And then you see at the top of the screen one of those open joints across where we put in caulking, then a lead T on top of it. The thing that destroys caulking most in an exterior condition is ultraviolet sunlight. And the more you can keep ultraviolet light off the caulking, the longer it will last. And therefore we put caulking on where we can and put a lead T on top of it so the sun doesn't get a chance to burn into it. And we can keep the lead. Before Notre Dame burned, the entire roof was covered with, I don't know what kind of weight of lead. The entire roof was lead. It was unbelievable. It had been there for centuries. And so it does last a long time. And we're hoping we get the same life out of our lead we're protecting these caulk joints with. Now we're jumping from the top of the building to the interior of the building. This is a detail of a drawer in the governor's desk. Now, there are desks and then there are desks. This desk weighs between 350 and 400 pounds, and it is solid walnut. Yes, there's some ebony, some holly, some lighter wood. I'll show you the marquetry on the face of the desk. You can see just a little bit on the far right edge in the middle where some of the ornamental inlay was set into that desk. This was done completely with our own staff in-house. And what you saw, let me back up one. From the curve you see in the middle of the screen, you look past it and you're looking at the drawer that's supposed to be inside the case of the desk. The exterior case of the desk has been removed. You needed a curved piece of walnut to cover up that drawer. Well, when you have people with that kind of talent, there's your curved piece of walnut to cover up the drawer. Then, after all of that repair to the casework and the cabinetry was done, there was a huge bow in the desktop. Now this desktop is over 8 feet long and a little under 4 feet in depth, and it's 1.5 inches thick slab of solid walnut. And this thing had bowed like this. And we put glass tops on the top of restored furniture. And if we didn't put the lamp and the other things for the governor on top of it, we could have taken all of that off and just spun that glass top around like a top on that high-centered bow in the walnut desktop. Now, this is how you solve that kind of bow. I didn't specify any of this stuff. Our cabinet maker knows how to do this. He took the top off. At the bottom of the screen is the top. Those verticals you see there are 2x4s and 4x4s that are going up to the floor structure above, and he's putting pressure on that top, bowing it the opposite direction. After the finish was stripped off the top, applied a little water and just kept cranking on the pressure and cranking on the pressure. It sat there for, I think, 3 weeks, maybe 4, and he let it up and see, ultimately flattened it out. The lesson to this is, if you finish a piece of wood, don't forget to finish all sides of the wood. Don't leave the back side unfinished, because what will happen is moisture will get in that unfinished side and cause the wood to swell. Where the finish exists, that won't happen. So finish all sides of your woodwork and you'll avoid that kind of warping and bowing that was present on this very exotic desk. Now, there's the top once flattened, completely refinished. You'll notice the size of the top relative to the fellow, Steve Jansen on the right, who's doing the finish work. And there's the desk without its top. Notice that inlay work you see on it. Each one of those pieces is like in a puzzle. You cut them out and you glue them together and put them into the surface of the desk. This is the front of the desk. This is the desk with top. On the governor's side, you'll see where the drawers are on the right and on the left, where that curved walnut had to be put in to conceal it. And those are the 5 very talented people who had the opportunity to work on this desk and did the work that they did. They are fantastic and in order. They are Mike Marshall, that big fellow with a beard on the left, Lana Gable, the blonde lady in front of him, Don Schneider, the fellow in the back, Steve Jansen, who just retired from us about 2 years ago with 45 years with the office. And the fellow on the right is John McKeegan, our very talented machinist. Anything you need to have done in metal, John can work miracles, just like the woodworkers can. So there's the finished product and the team that did it. And there is the desk in situ, as they say, back in the governor's office. We've thought about doing some redecorating in there. No, not really. This office has largely looked like this since 1927, when Adam McMullen first occupied the chair behind it. So it is beautiful. The 4 chairs in front of it have also been restored. And so we're gradually getting to the most exotic finishes in the building, and those are in the governor's private office suite. It's remarkable what the state paid for and did in that 1927 decoration of the office. Now, Ron Doulis, a good friend, now retired from our office. He took charge of restoring 48 gallery chairs and 7 counselor chairs in the governor's hearing room. All hand-tooled leather. Notice the back on this chair. It has holes in the gold border on it, hunks of leather that have fallen out. We had reproduction pieces made. The only place we could find was in Belgium. We go where we can to get the quality that we require. We look domestically first, but we don't slow down if we can't find the quality we want. And therefore, we went to Belgium. Ron is de-upholstering this chair right now, and he spent an enormous time calculating a new seat suspension. Originally it had springs. We're not going to let springs go bad and the webbing fall out, and all of a sudden you end up with literal bucket seats. We put a wood panel in it that has some flex to it, put other types of padding across the surface of that, so when people sit on the desk or sit on the chair, it's a little more firm than it might normally have been, but it will never drop all the way through and become a bucket seat, and it preserves our investment in our hand-tooled leather reupholstery. There's a back that is restored on one of the counselor chairs, gold leaf. The nails were in poor shape. The nails, those ornamental squares you see around the perimeter, were some that John McKeegan had to do some restoration for us on. And here you see, I come along when all the heavy lifting is done just for the photographs. And so I'm there putting the chairs in place back in the governor's office, and Matt Hansen's there with us. Here's where the architects come in and steal the thunder. But it has been wonderful fun to be able to see this work occur. The seats of these chairs were just turquoise vinyl, and they were really not a good match. They were as close as they could make it. These chairs have been completely rebuilt, the joints re-glued, everything about these chairs has been completely restored. In addition, this is the governor's chair. When you're the chief executive, you get the chair with all the horns and whistles, and this chair, take a look at the finials on the top of that chair, the chair back. Then take a look right up here. We had a couple of spares made for our centennial, and Mike Marshall, our cabinet maker, was the one who did that work. Here's a photograph that shows the condition relative to the original versus the new. The new in the background is without finish. The one on the right is an original that's lost most of its husk. And so Mike rebuilt them. We restained them, refinished them, and so on, put them in place. And that's the governor's chair with the finials half restored. And this is a counselor chair that sits beside it. This also shows the gold fringe. The last fringe we had was about 1 inch long. It looked like a doily compared to what it should have looked like. And once we got the gold fringe on it, the seats were put in place. We had a product that we could then be proud of. And Mike also restored the semicircular counselor's table that sits in front of these chairs. And there were huge sections of the top that had cracked. You couldn't write with it, or your pencil would go through the hole. That has now been completely restored and stabilized. And here's a one-slide memory for me. Thanks to community support and the Capital Environs Commission's advocacy, we were able to name the boulevard south of the Capitol. We originally knew as 15th Street from A to the Capitol, 7 blocks long. Our friends with Lincoln Electric System were kind enough to take care of the overhead wires that went across the street at mid-block. Those were taken and put underground. We've had cooperation with the city, LES in particular, for all kinds of improvements in the Capitol environs. And in, what was it, I think it was 2009, excuse me, we were able to rename it. These are the 3 living descendants of Bertram Goodhue. On the left, Nick Goodhue. Next to him, his sister, help me out, Roxanne. Hang on. I think I did. Jill Goodhue Hawksma. 40 years, a few things are slipping out. Next, across from underneath the word Boulevard, is Romy Wiley, who wrote the most recent book on Bertram Goodhue in his residential work, and the fellow on the right is Yates Satterley, who is cousin. Yates is son of Goodhue's daughter, and Nick and Jill on the left are children of Goodhue's son, Hugo. And it was a great event. We were able to get them back here. They were delighted. In fact, I talked to Nick for about an hour within the last week. We remain in good, close contact with him. And there's a great affinity group, some family members and others, trying to do good things with Goodhue's remaining drawings, which are very impressive. We're trying to get them into a location where they can be properly conserved, maintained, and be accessible to scholars, and there's a great demand for that kind of thing these days. And courtyards, we can't leave the courtyards out. This is a project I truly didn't think I would see completed in my lifetime. But enter a group called the Former Legislators of the Nebraska Unicameral, or something like that. We call them the Formers. They were not going to be denied. And once the masonry work was done, they said, it's time to landscape those courtyards. And I said, well, we can't landscape the courtyards without putting the fountains in place first, because we have to tear the courtyards up to put the fountains in place. You don't want our new plants sitting there when we have to do that destruction. Well, this is what they looked like before we started the work. This is what they looked like after we finished the work. Something to note is these fountains, this was about a $3 million project. And the fountains in the courtyards are kind of like the proverbial tale about icebergs. What you see above ground is about 10% of the cost in this case. The real expense is underground. It's the pumps, it's the chlorinators, it's the wiring, it's everything that makes these work and look good. That's all buried in a pit under the fountain and run through a carrier pipe into the basement, where there are 4 separate filter rooms that operate these fountains. I will say, let me take another photograph here. There we go. And, of course, once the former said, okay, Ripley, now we bought you your fountains. Let's get on with this landscaping stuff. What did they do? They went out into the community and raised $1.4 million to put the plants in place. The reason it's so expensive, $400,000 was dedicated to the planting, the labor and the plants themselves, $100,000 a courtyard. $1 million was raised for an endowment for us in perpetuity to take care of the courtyards, which was the original problem with Herminghouse's landscape in the 1930s falling on hard times. The hard times that I saw as a kid in the 1950s, when I'd walk in and look out into the courtyards, and the walks were buckled, and there were big gaps in the hedges and so on. The formers took care of that because they've come up with the money that earns enough interest to take care of that perpetually year in and year out. So the tile in the fountains is the last little feature I'll talk about with regard to this particular effort. And there were people paying attention far more closely than I thought, because the First Lady, Suzanne Shore, called me one day, and it was right after an article had come out in the newspaper about we were hoping at some point in time to be able to come up with the money to put the tile in the bowls of the fountain. They said at some point we'll raise the money and we'll get that done too. And she called me and said, Bob, I have a lady who's interested in how much that tile work might cost. And I said, oh, very good. Well, I said, it's about $150,000 in round figures. And she said, oh, well, no problem. And I thought, that's my kind of call. And she said, yes, the donor that I am thinking of and has contacted me said, find out how much it will cost, we'll pay for it. Just out and out pay for it. They knew it couldn't be anything more than, they knew they could afford to pay for it, let's put it that way. And indeed they did. The donor wished to remain anonymous, another incredibly generous gesture on behalf of the donor. And so from a Nebraska donor, we received the money for the tile and the labor to put these Basazza glass tiles back in place. This is a Venetian glass. It's a product of Italy. It's sold in the United States, very high quality. And the really kind of interesting thing about this is I never thought I'd have to kind of deal with this option, but it was a requirement. Bronze, when it gets cold, shrinks, gets hot, it expands. Tile, glass, may shrink, but you'd have to have a micrometer, probably a digital micrometer, to be able to measure how much it shrinks and grows with temperature change. So what was happening is we had a tile that was going to be attached to the bronze, which was going to do a lot of moving throughout the year. If we were going to attach it to a conventional bed of grout or mortar, it would have popped loose because the bronze would have been moving, the tile bed would not have been moving, and they would have sheared off of one another in 2 or 3 years of freeze-thaw through the change of seasons. We were able to go to one of the descendants, perfect, one of the descendants of one of the Goodhue associates who finished Goodhue's unfinished projects at the time of his death in 1924. And he happened to work for the aerospace industry. And we said, say, you know, we remember there were tiles on the belly of the space shuttle. What kind of glue did they use to put that stuff on? And he said, oh, yeah, well, that's da-da-da-da-da-da. And he ran the numbers, and he gave us a couple of suppliers. And sure enough, we got a hold of them. And you've got a clear adhesive caulk that's holding those tiles in place. There's no grout between them. It was this clear, looks like clear silicone goo. And you hire a really talented tile setter. He put it on with a trowel. He had these tiles laid out in sheets from the supplier and just laid it down in that glue, tamped it all in place, and there it remains. Freeze thaw, be damned, so to speak. This glue allows for that movement and keeps the finish of these fountains in place. So there you see the courtyard with a portion of the landscaping in place. The outermost portion of that ring and that which goes into the somewhat triangular shaped areas are all privet hedges. Herminghaus, our landscape architect, who also did Pioneers Park, he did Woodshire Residential Park, was a devotee of privet hedges. And therefore, we have a very, very good quality hybrid privet hedge in place today. And the courtyards look far better than this now. We don't quite have the blooms on the tulips. And then when the tulips are done, they're taken out and petunias are put in place. So these annuals are put in place alternate twice in a year. And that's what really takes the bulk of the maintenance money for the landscape. So it's wonderful to look at. I'm delighted, and I will show you my last couple slides. 14th floor murals. There were two aspects of the building that Goodhue designed that were never realized when the building was first built. Now bear in mind, Goodhue died just 2 years into the 10 years it took to build the building. So he never saw the building complete, even in its original form. But even then, in 1934, when the landscaping was done, two principal features of the building were left out. One, 20 murals, of which there are 12 on second floor, and the 8 in the memorial chamber, which you're looking at here, were the last of the 20 that were originally designed to be put in the building and were never installed. They were realized, the last of those murals were realized in 1996. They were painted by Stephen Roberts of Omaha, and they follow the original theme, generally speaking, that Alexander prescribed those murals to represent in the 1930s. And so what you see on the left is an historic photograph taken in the 1930s of the memorial chamber without murals, which is what I remember as a kid. I remember going to that level, walking around in that room. I mean, that Belgian black marble and all the other finishes in that room, I kept thinking, man, this is one fine room. What's it for? Well, I didn't have any vision that there were to be murals on the wall as a kid, but once I found out what was missing, that was put in place. So those were realized in 1996, and in 2017 we dedicated the other missing element of Goodhue's original design, and those were the fountains in the courtyards. Those were left out. The original landscape was put in place in the courtyards in the 30s, but fell on hard times quickly because they didn't have the talent our staff possesses today to maintain them. But with the fountains in the courtyard and the murals on 14th floor, we pretty much wrapped up all the missing parts of Goodhue's building. Now our challenge is to just do a great job of being stewards and preserving the building for our great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren. And that's easily how long it will last. Now, believe it or not, I'm going to stop talking. And I think I made it within the time limit, didn't I?
You did.
Close.
We have the 5 minutes for questions.
You know, after 40 years, I finally learned something. So, are there any questions about what I've told you? Or did I confuse everybody so completely there won't be any? Oh, Eileen, good.
So, some of the projects that you talked about today, you've also given brown bags about them.
Mm-hmm.
So if people want to see more information, like about the fountain project, the chairs, restoration, you can go back onto the PAL website.
Excellent.
We have a brown bag link on the website that you can go back and find it. I think one of them was in 2015 and maybe another one later on.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can search by Bob's name just under YouTube and you'll find them.
Yeah, thank you, Eileen. Do by all means. Yes, Roxanne. We have a website that can also help out.
Excellent. Or you can go to our Capitol's website, capital.nebraska.gov, and there are SOAR newsletters that tell about all those projects and many, many more. So those of you who love our Capitol, go to PAL's website or go to Capitol's website, and you will get much more information.
Very good. Part of our team.
Is there a plan to restore the reading room in the law library?
Good
walls?
question, Eric. Good question. Yes, there is a plan to do just that. Now, there is one of my all-time favorite places in the Capitol as an institution and as a piece of architecture, interior architecture, is the State Law Library. It is a fantastic. I didn't know it was there till I was in college. And I was on the third level overlooking the rotunda one day, and I saw somebody walk right up, and I saw a state library, and I thought, oh, I probably can't go in there, maybe members only or something. Oh no, it was a law clerk, no doubt. Grabbed the door, pulled it open, and I saw this huge cavernous room beyond it, and then walked in, and I thought, Mrs. Ripley didn't raise a fool, I'll just walk in there, and they can always tell me to leave. And I opened the door, walked in, and nobody said to leave, and I just wandered around in this place. It was unbelievable. The law library is a treasure in the Capitol, and unfortunately, many people have never been there. Third floor in the rotunda area of the building. Go to one of the 4 tower elevators, go up. It's on the south central side of the rotunda, a pair of doors in the center, big. They're 9 feet tall. They're not easy to miss. And there is a room clear at the back end, all the way to the south end, where you see the lawgivers of history carved into the parapet on the outside of the building. On the interior, 3 big arched windows let light into the south reading room, which is intended and originally had a beautiful gold leaf Art Deco-esque wall stencil of gold leaf and on a teal blue background. It is a spectacular piece of finish. We have some of the original repeats of that stencil work exposed, and our hope is, all things go well, knock on wood, our prices come in good on the 4th phase of the project, which is due to begin sometime this summer. The intent is, as you had asked, Eric, yes, the intent is to do that restoration work. We've had the consultant who does that work come in for us and give us pricing, and we've lined them up, and if everything, all the stars align and we can get our budget and our expectations in the same place, we will restore that room. It will make the library much more popular than it is currently, and it's already popular, I assure you. We get as many tourists in there as we do people pulling volumes off the shelf. So do remember that. Likely, with Matt Hansen and others, they'll get the media in there, have them take photographs, show the work in progress. You'll have an opportunity to see another missing element of the building returned to visibility. Any other questions?
Unfortunately, we've run out of time.
Thank you, thank you, thank you for today, and especially for 40 years of support. It's been great.